Hey, leaders. In this episode of Leading Collaborative Response, Lorna and I are joined once again by Darrin DeForge, principal of Joan Carr Catholic Elementary Junior High in Edmonton, Alberta, and a colleague that we've had the great fortune of knowing for many, many years. Darrin brings a wealth of experience from his 18 years as a principal, including opening 3 new schools and leading significant projects in inclusive education, assessment, and teacher recruitment. We're excited to explore his perspectives on fostering school culture and how the school is integrating research-driven strategies with their collaborative response work to drive meaningful change. So let's get started.
Are you a leader who is navigating the nuances of leading collaborative response in your school or district? Are you unsure of what collaborative response is? Are you looking to understand the critical role leadership plays when establishing and refining a collaborative response approach?
Collaborative response began as a grassroots approach to focus on the needs of students through a framework of collaboration. That approach has grown to a movement that is training leadership and education.
Through the Leading Collaborative Response podcast, Kurtis and I share our own experiences of leading collaborative response and lessons learned as we continue to learn and gain insight through the experiences of working alongside others. We also have the opportunity to engage in conversations with school and divisional leaders implementing the framework in their own organizations.
We know great leaders build great teams because that is what every child deserves. Subscribe to the Leading Collaborative Response podcast and join the thousands of schools seeing success for students through intentional and focused collaborative efforts. Welcome to another episode of Leading Collaborative Response. As always, I'm Kurtis Hewson, co-founder and lead learner of Jigsaw Learning.
And I'm Lorna Hewson. Today, we're honored to have Darrin DeForge join us. Darrin's career includes serving as Director of Inclusive Education for Edmonton Catholic Schools and co-leading division projects focused on assessment and reporting, as well as developing tools for teacher recruitment. Currently, the principal of Joan Carr Catholic Elementary Junior High, Darrin is passionate about visible learning, collaborative response, and the importance of self and collective efficacy in shaping a thriving school community. Let's just jump right in and learn from Darrin's experience and expertise.
So it's always fun to get through the 45 seconds of script to get to the unscripted conversations here. So Darrin, it's so great to be able to connect with you once again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, you bet. And we'll let our listeners know that this is not Darrin's first time on our podcast. We'll make sure to link in the show notes another episode that he and members of his leadership team at Joan Carr were on and sharing some of their work around collaborative response. But we're excited to have Darrin back to share what's been some of the next evolution of the work. So Darrin, before we jump into that, do you mind giving us just a little bit further background, anything we may not have covered in that biographical sketch to start us off? And then tell us a little bit about Joan Carr.
Yeah, I know. I think you pretty much covered the biographical sketch piece, kind of it in a nutshell. Yeah. But Joan Carr is a unique school, and we've only opened in 2022, so we're only 3 years old. And this school has, to my knowledge of any other school in the division, has experienced a growth of triple the population from what we started. Yeah,
it's been, even though you've been existing for 3, it's almost been like 3 brand new schools in a sense each year, hey?
That's right. And so we had one of our sister schools in the West End who had an overpopulation. And so we had that space. And so those students are with us until this will be the final year. And then they'll go to their new school in the West End. But that will still, so we went from 385 students in year 1 to 1,066. Yes, so it's an unprecedented growth rate that I'm pretty sure no other schools experience, but maybe I'm wrong. But even when those students, 300 of them, go back to their West End school in September of 2025, we're still going to have 850 to 900 students, which is pretty much close to capacity anyways.
And the grade configurations, Darrin, for our audience?
The numbers or?
Is it pre-K? Do you have a pre-K program in this?
No, so it's K to 9.
Yeah, kindergarten to 9.
Yeah, K to 9. This will be our first graduating class of grade 9s this year, so it's exciting for us. Nice. But there's multiple grade levels, classrooms. So the collaboration piece is easily done in our school when you're looking at anywhere between 4 and 5 grade partners.
Right. So before we jump into where's the work at now, you and I and Lorna have known each other for a number of years through each one of those schools that you've opened, and then the divisional role that you had. I'd love to start off with looking back a little bit and what initially drew you, Darrin, to the collaborative response work. And then we want to jump into what does it look like now at Joan Carr?
Yeah. I think that, when I initially read the book and looked at how it is solution focused, it really is centered around, number one, trying to solve those problems that are often experienced at that tier 2 level, where classroom teachers are running into, what do I do next? I'm struggling through this piece of it. So that piece of it was a draw in, because of course we're all experiencing pretty much the same things in our classrooms. So that was one piece of it. And then the second piece was the fact that it comes from our teachers themselves. That whole piece of it where, and this goes back to my passion for not only that self-efficacy, but the fact that collectively we can actually do something about that, right? And how that spreads rapidly in a school. And that collective piece of it where teachers felt empowered that, hey, I actually do have this, and sometimes you get that sense of when the classroom is tough and you're facing many diverse students, you get that sense that I don't really know what to do. What I feel the collaborative response does is not only does it empower the teacher, but it builds their confidence. Because sometimes, as you know, within those meetings, they actually answer that question themselves. Yeah. Or at the very least, they have a great partner who they frequently may collaborate with, or they're next door. They have all kinds of hallway conversations and formal meetings. And inevitably, every time we do a collaborative team meeting, we always have someone turn to their partner and say, I actually didn't know you did that. Yeah. That's the best part of it, is that, and so now all of a sudden you have not only that sense that, hey, someone's here to help me, like I actually have someone for support, but you also have that piece of it where you can now walk away with 1 or 2 things that you can try.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. And you're right. Like there's so many things that come out of those collaborative team meetings, especially. And I'd love for you to be able, Darrin, to talk a little bit more specifically about the collaborative team meeting, because some of the pieces that you're talking about around empowering teachers through those key issues and sharing practice in a way that is really encouraging and supportive really come from the collaborative team meeting.
And I'd love to back that up just a little bit before you went there, because I've heard you share numerous times the moment of epiphany that you had when shifting from, as an admin team, we used to provide the coverage at a previous school so teachers could meet, to getting to the place of we want to be part of those conversations as leadership as well. But you've talked before about the epiphany that came in the collaborative team meeting, and then let's go right into what does it look like now?
Yeah, that is with all great, and for those people who are starting that collaborative response approach, you have to realize that it is messy and you figure things out, and that's okay. You have to stick with it. But we made some major mistakes. Learnings that we had in the first year. And one of those, in all good intentions, was to free up the teachers. And of course, we had our learning coach who would run those meetings. And we were trying as administrators to work through the process of OneNote, of understanding. And yes, we got that feedback and read the notes, but we were covering as administrators. We felt, okay, we'll free up the teachers. Well, of course, that doesn't work, because, you go through a OneNote process, you don't really understand or feel the sense of what is going on in that meeting. And so very quickly after year one, moved into year two, and we're excited to be a part of those meetings. So we had done some creative thinking and some different scheduling and utilized our music teacher and some other part-time teachers that we had in order for us to ensure that we could still free up the teachers, but be present in those meetings. And that, of course, was one big aha moment. The second one was the importance of the structures of the meeting, like really having that collaborative team meeting laid out clearly. And that was a learning that was even in the second year. We started off that process, and then we finally went back and said, we need to actually go back to what Kurtis talked about in terms of the structures and the roles. And once that was in place, and you're right, we talk about how it's a little bit scripted in the beginning and it's a little bit weird, but it actually is, in the long term, that structure was a critical piece to keeping us on track and keeping us focused on not the student that everybody wants to talk about, but the key issue, which led to those strategies and led to teachers actually contributing.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about the collaborative team meeting. And again, we want to reinforce for our audience, and Darrin, we know we're speaking to someone who's going to be nodding. We know the collaborative team meeting is not collaborative response. It's a part of our overall collaborative response, but it's a pretty important part. So can you describe what it looks like at Joan Carr? And then we want to really talk about that shift that we had a conversation at the start of the year, and you were, for lack of a better word, just buzzing with the excitement of what the vision that you had for how this was going to connect to some of the visible learning work.
Yeah, I think for us, we do the 4 layers. Yep. And we're not perfect at the 4 layers by any means, but that piece of it's important for us. In a large school, we need to really be responsive to that tip of the pyramid. And right now, I think, for example, we have 51 students diagnosed with ASD, like we know, and many in the queue, right? So we have I think it's the national average is around 2% of the population. We're at 5%. Right, so more than double the population. So we had to find ways to creatively deal with that, because as you know, across the province, we know that there's never enough money and never enough funding. Yeah. So we had to look at ways to support that, and those tiered level meetings are super important for that, so that we can get the proper supports in the proper places. But what we discovered with in the collaborative team meeting process as we moved along, and again, I've done this for 5 years now, and you're always learning, you're always growing. So that's something the audience needs to know. It's never stagnant. And that's what I appreciate about both of you in terms of how you live that research, going from a pyramid to a teardrop, right? Yeah. Just that basic change in the shape, which I want to comment on, because one of the things that we talked about a couple of years ago, and we've actually implemented here, is that looking at that tier 1 and finding those non-negotiables. Yeah. And that tier 1 was a critical piece, because we looked at that as the big part of the pyramid, when really the tier 2 is the fat part of that piece, where many different strategies, which I'll talk about, which led us to what we're doing now. But what was a really key piece for us was establishing as a staff, including our multidisciplinary team members and our educational assistants on a PD day, was bringing them together and saying, okay, chart paper around the room, the old-fashioned way, and what are our non-negotiables that we need to say that every classroom at Joan Carr has to have. And we feels important, right? And so we established those 10 or 12 different tier 1 strategies that we are now comfortable saying that as a part, when you come into Joan Carr, the expectation is here, we'll give you the supports, we have lots of supports, but the expectation is that, number 1, you are fluent in visible learning. So students, diverse, EAL, all types of students are exposed to learning intentions, success criteria, and understanding where their goals are. They need visual schedules. They had flexible seating. There was a variety of sensory tools available. So those didn't come from us. They came from the collaboration of our staff, who felt. But then being able to reinforce that if we say
visible schedules or visual schedules are critical, then we're going to be looking for it in your classroom if you've said it's non-negotiable.
Correct.
Or sorry, if you as teachers have said this is non-negotiable at Joan Carr.
That's right. Yeah. So classrooms are equipped with those non-negotiables that, hey, we didn't say they were important. You said they were important.
Yeah.
Right.
So then where we discovered, I was trying to wrap my head around the model change and the tier 2 and the bubble. And then it sort of hit me over the summer this year. We talk about these instructional strategies that are very much a part of visible learning. And that whole research with Hattie, which we not spend a lot of time, but it's a core anchor for us. It's one of the pieces of our priorities. And so what we discovered was that you would come together as a grade 3 team, and you're excited because teachers are generating strategies. We've got a plan, and we go back and practice those strategies. We come back and celebrate the success of them, and they're high impact. But then only the grade 3 teachers know what those strategies are. And you don't really think about that until you're actually, I just thought one day, like, there's so many great things happening in this school, but when those grade 3 teachers generate those 2-3 things that they're committed to trying to, that's where it stays. It lies within those grade 3s. And so we looked at the work of Hattie, and I don't, it might be sort of a buzz thing, the playbook, right? That's a big thing right now. But what we decided to do was we decided to take from those collaborative team meetings, those high impact strategies that we found teachers are using and effective. So they're coming from us. It's not like we're going on Amazon and buying the latest playbook and saying, these are the strategies that are best for you. Well, these are the strategies that are best for the students of Joan Carr, because they're generated from the teachers of Joan Carr, right? And so what we did was create a structured format, which I shared with Kurtis. And in that structured format, we talked about laying out a format that's specific for all the strategies so that it's not all over the place. We wanted to have sure that they were following a certain format. In particularly what we wanted, because we also used the work of Jim Knight in instructional coaching and the recommendation of having those checklists. And so in that strategy, it gives the background, it gives the research why, it connects it to Hattie's effect sizes, and then it goes right into those success criteria checklists. So what would I see the teacher being successful at? What would I see the students being successful at? And what we're really excited about is, because of the high neurodiverse population, is involving not only our teachers in strategies that would support and enable neurodiverse learners to access curriculum just like everybody else and not sit at the back on some computer program, but actually be involved with the strategy and seeing how the success criteria would work for a neurodiverse learner. Now that's in the infancy stage of it, and we're developing that, as we don't have it for every strategy yet, but we're working with the support of our MDT, and in particularly as our targeted learning classroom teacher continues to work with our multidisciplinary team, and she is learning a number of strategies, then she actually can become a teacher source that adds to the neurodiverse success criteria from the lens of a teacher as well.
Yeah, and I'm just popping the playbook that you shared with us up on the screen for us to be able to take a look, but recognizing that some are going to be listening to this episode, not just seeing, we'll make sure to attach it into the show notes. But as I take a look, and it shows, all right, if you're looking at engagement strategies, here's 5 engagement strategies that our teachers are saying working. I imagine it will always be hard to have a print copy of this, because it's going to evolve and continually grow with each and every conversation you're having.
Yeah, and it's funny, our admin team had that conversation this morning about how we're already thinking, what would this look like after, because what we want is teacher input on the strategy. Now that you've lived it through a number of times, what are the things that you don't want to do now that you've lived this strategy, or you feel actually might not fit the success criteria, right? Or what are the things that we actually missed out on, right? So it has to be a living, it can't be, well, I suppose it could be in some reference places. I think a print copy wouldn't be a bad idea, but having the evolving phase of this type of availability online so that teachers can go in, eventually getting more comfortable with it, add to it, take things out, or just that continual work of trying to make it really teacher friendly and totally theirs to own.
See, and I think this is one of the most critical pieces is you could have put two people in a room, go to the Hattie work and develop playbooks for our school. And it would have had really sound strategy. I mean, it's great research and great work that's there, but you're almost reverse engineering in a sense of these are what our teachers have found. And now we're aligning it to the Hattie that not only do our teachers find, but it's also backed by other research as well. But I think the critical part here, and it's what we talk about in that development of a school's continuum of supports, because this really is building out your tier 2 strategies, but that it's completely owned by the teachers. This is Joan Carr's playbook.
And this is the essence of what you were talking about before, Darrin, about self-efficacy and collective efficacy. Yeah. This is just very evident that that's how you make that live.
Yeah, I think when we look at the other piece of it that we were pleasantly surprised with was as these strategies are being used, and as these strategies are being talked about, now what we have are within our staff are teachers saying, you know what, I've had like 5 people ask me about, doing collaborative whiteboards, right? Can I run a session on a Thursday, right? So now we have teachers saying they're actually delivering professional development. And we just did that before in November, where we had 2 teachers, each gave them half an hour, and they went about and talked about how they use it. So they're actually showing within all of our staff showed up. It was a voluntary thing, and almost 3/4 of the staff came to each one of those. And they came in and they said, okay, now can I see how you use this, right? At least get an idea from a teacher's perspective. And so now we have staff who are receiving that, number one, that peer, feedback as to, hey, I want to try this. And number 2, your staff leadership saying, okay, Darrin, can I present this? Because I've got a lot of the people knocking at the door and there's only so many administrators available to free up, right? So we just use a Thursday afternoon and say, hey, run this PD and go for it.
Man, is that right to the essence of what we're trying to get to with collaborative response is understanding in essence, the answer is in the room or in the school. How do we leverage the incredible expertise that's available in each and every school? And it's fascinating to me where as a leadership team, you're not leading the professional learning, you're more facilitating the teachers leading the professional learning for each other.
Yeah, and I think probably that advice I would have is I think it's important for us to be instructional leaders as principals and as an admin team. And to get that, we have to, for teachers to feel comfortable with that, you have to be able to do that and deliver it as a principal. But it's that gradual release piece where we're doing, and I'm not saying less is the word, but we're having more comfort level from the teachers initiating, saying, hey, can I do this piece on a Thursday? I want to talk about literacy, and I have some things that I want to do. It'll only take 15, 20 minutes. Like that, that's perfect, right? You want sure, we can have you do that. And so we want our staff to understand that we're learning alongside them, that we're not the experts. And we cannot, just like you can't what I think where schools struggle is where there's maybe 4 consultants, or in some districts, maybe 1. And so, sure, you want that consultant, but you can't have them every whatever Thursday, or there's only one of them. So you have to develop that professional development and sense of self-efficacy and that continuous growth of learning from within your building. And we all know the research, the one and done type of PD just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So if you can generate the professional development based on research and best practices and looking at those tools that are really good, high impact instruction, and the teachers are wanting to deliver that, I kind of think that that's the penultimate.
Yeah. Well, and that's where that collaborative team meeting structure becomes so essential, because we're surfacing real issues that we're experiencing with students. We're offering up suggestions and ideas, but then for you as admin involved, going, there's a really good idea. We should be utilizing collaborative whiteboards more. Can you lead some learning for us in that?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. And the leadership skills that are being developed by having those opportunities for staff is amazing. That's really incredible.
So, Darrin, we had posted up in our Facebook group, The Collaborative Leader, that we were having these conversations. We've had a few podcasts recorded this week, and asked if there was any questions. And one of our members in that community offered a few questions, and I think there's one here that's really, really pertinent to you, because obviously within your school, being in a metro center and as large as it is, you mentioned English as additional language learners, and we also know that a lot of the literature is referring to that as multilingual learners, students that are engaging in another language. What have been some specific things that you think this work has done that has led to success for those learners in particular? Can you cite even some of your non-negotiables that have come into place that you're seeing success for your multilingual learners?
We'll be right back to continue this episode. Communication is essential when navigating supports for students. How often have you had a student who required intensive supports which were organized and navigated by someone other than yourself? How do you know the decisions being made and the supports being designed for that student? In WeCollab, each time a student is discussed in any meeting, a record of the decisions can be emailed directly to those involved, even if you're not part of that particular meeting. Email updates allow you to stay on top of all the supports provided to your students. Start your free trial now to experience the power of WeCollab. And now back to our conversation.
Yeah, with when you take a look at even the non-negotiables, right? And so when you're looking at visuals within English as an additional language learner, those are critical. It's that piece of it, whether it's development. For example, if you're using a high impact strategy that deals with vocabulary, well, that piece of it's going to be super important. Of course, it's going to support the neurodiverse learner, but it's also going to support the EAL, the English as second language learner, because the visual piece is super important. So what we're finding that whole idea of universal design for learning,
intended for one, good for all.
Good for all, right? And of course we have. It's going to be good for the EAL, like the student with English as a second language, or it might be good for the diverse learner. But of course, what we're finding is that all students in the classroom are benefiting from visual schedules.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And I recall too that within the school, not only is it we say visual schedules are important, but I remember even sharing some artifacts at a previous collaborative response retreat where then we also have a space where, and here's some pictures of what it looks like at different classrooms within the school, that it's not just this is a non-negotiable, but this is what it looks like within Joan Carr.
Yeah, and that's super important, right, is to ensure that they might look different, but it's present, that visual schedule is super present. And for some of our diverse learners, it is a critical piece to their day, right? They need to know what's coming up. But for our English as a second language students, it's that visual idea, particularly a level 1 student, you know very little English, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to negotiate a new country, a different school system likely, and having those UDL types of strategies provides that a bit of safety. It provides some comfort level, and it provides those students some confidence that I think for a really important piece of it is that because it's available to everyone, it really reduces the stigma of it being, oh, this is for this type of learner, this is for this type of student. Actually, everybody has exposure to it and everybody actually uses it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Darrin, I came home from a session with Edmonton Catholic school leaders where you had led some work around the TLC. And I was gushing to Lorna about, oh my goodness, you have to hear what Darrin's got established. So I know she has a question that she wants to pose out to you about that TLC, and we're going to break down that acronym.
So Kurtis talks about the targeted learning classroom that you have established at Joan Carr, and just thinking about what are some of the supports for students with complex and diverse needs that have been able to really be established through that TLC?
And I think it would be valuable to even take it back to the why. What was the why behind moving to this, and then what it looks like?
I guess the impetus of it, the why, was what we were discovering was you would, because we're getting to that sort of state where it's difficult to, even for schools to have that one-to-one support.
Yeah.
And as you know, in many divisions or school environments, it's often a cluster. Yeah. And so what we were discovering was that you might have an educational assistant or you might have a behavior therapist, and they would be assigned to a number of students. And what we were finding is that often in a cluster, one student may dominate. Mm-hmm. And so really, one out of the 3 students is, because not to the fault of any educational assistant, that's a hard job. Yeah, right. And you're trying to negotiate a diverse learner that might have certain specific demands or specific things that are difficult. And most times, some other students you might have a cluster, but really one student is benefiting from that cluster. So we had to figure out ways, number one, to ensure that those students were programmed for and were developing skills. Yeah. And number 2 is to ensure that our educational assistants actually had time with their other students. Mm-hmm. And so the targeted learning classroom is not a program, right? It's not a pullout. It's a part of the student's day. So yes, they do go to a different classroom, but that classroom, those students are chosen and clustered for supports. And in that classroom is a teacher, because you need to have that teacher-to-teacher connection, so that strategies are being passed back and forth. And in some cases, the targeted learning classroom teacher may have really given other teachers who may be new to the profession or not sure how to support that student with diverse learning needs in their classroom. Now you've given them a link. Okay, I'm trying this in the TLC classroom. I want to pass this on, that this is working, right? Or vice versa, the classroom teacher is saying, yeah, I've gotten this far, but here's what we need to work on further. So there's that dialogue back and forth. And then the educational assistant, because some of these students, they might be there 3 times a day. Some students might be there 1 time a day, because the morning focuses on literacy and it focuses on specific strategies to support students in communication. Often, I would say probably more than half of our students actually are non-communicators, right? So we have to figure out that now the device becomes something that's super important for them, right? So alongside of the teacher is what we call TASLs, which are speech and learning assistants. Mm-hmm. And so they're very adept and versed in the use of the AC devices. So what's happening now is students' voice is becoming a priority. So we have vocabulary and predictable sentences. And so students are now being able to communicate through their talkers things that they can know and do. Yeah. Whereas that might not have been apparent from within the classroom environment and dealing with 27, 28, 29 students. How do you find time for that, right? So not only are those students coming to the targeted learning classroom for support, they're coming with specific intentional goals based on their individual program plans. And that's what's super exciting, is that it's not just you're coming in here and here's what you're doing, and it's actually targeted. So those groups that speech and language assistant is working with is targeting perhaps use of the device. And this group might be targeting phonemic awareness. And this group might be targeting. So each of those people involved in that room are very specifically and intentionally carrying out those program goals.
I love that.
And my understanding is students flex and flow through that space completely. It's not the old resource room model. It's highly, highly inclusive of flex and flow to meet those individualized needs.
Yeah, and the afternoon is actually focused on behavior. So we're looking at, supporting the students that are having maybe social interactions, or how to play-based ideas on or taking turns, or understanding how to communicate frustrations, right? So there's that language-based in the morning, and the afternoon is based with behavior supports, right? Yeah. Because what we're finding is because the language-based piece is intense in the morning, and the neat part is on Thursdays, our division hosts, and it's only periodically, it's called AAC Goes to School, and it's done over Microsoft Teams, and it's our division people working with educational assistants and their students and helping them to understand how to use the talkers. But that is a certain finite amount of time. So what we do is every Thursday is AAC Goes to School. And we do that all year, and it's through the curricular lens of science, because this is what our kids are highly excited about through experiments and different kinds of things. And now in that piece, our educational assistants are working specifically with their students, and the slide in beside is having those, and we're lucky to have another part-time therapeutic assistant in speech and language also support on that morning. And so now you have 2.5 what we call tassels helping the EAs put predictable sentences in, add this to the talker, use this photograph to show what they're learning. So then that AAC Goes to School is also a learning platform for our educational assistants. How do I best use this talker? And then what we're finding now is that the talkers come back into classrooms.
Yeah.
Now the students' voice is actually shared. So when you talk about things that they want to do in science, they're now sharing it with their group, but they do it through their talker.
Oh, that is so exciting. And just thinking about that, the meaningful intervention, which is really what you're doing through that classroom, meaningful intervention based on students' needs, and explicitly around that language piece, which we know how when students are challenged with communication, it impacts everything else, all parts of their learning. And being able to have very specific intervention that is supporting that need is really amazing. Yeah.
And to no surprise, the behaviors go down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Communication is now available for them.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what the afternoon piece is that regulation piece, that how do I express how do I use my device, or in some cases, how do I use my language orally to express my frustrations. And so there's specific groups and strategies attached to that's run through our emotional behavioral specialist. Mm-hmm. Teacher's there to support. In the morning, the teacher drives a lot of that because it's of course classroom based. In the afternoon, the emotional behavioral specialist drives that piece of it because that's more in their realm of, okay, what can we use as strategies so that you can regulate and express yourself?
That back and forth with the teacher is so critical, because it becomes that isolated practice if we don't have that communication back and forth with teachers based on what that student needs, and not just in the moment in that classroom, but rather impacting every day, always through their educational experience.
Agreed. Yeah.
Darrin, this is so interesting because you are absolute living proof of, you may have even heard me say this at different points of, you're going to get to a place in this work when somebody says, tell me about how you're collaboratively responding to student need in your building. And your response is, grab a coffee because it's going to take a while.
Yeah,
it's going to take a while to describe every way that we connect and align how we're supporting adults and kids.
Yeah.
And you have to understand too that it's like, and I know I've said this before, but it's a messy process.
Like,
what this targeted learning classroom began with in June of 2022 doesn't look anything like it does now. And in fact, its evolution has undergone one more change. And it's the working of the teacher in that team, that unification where they're saying, we've reached this point, and I think that we need to go in this direction. And of course, me as a principal, I'm going to 100% support that, because I'm not living what they're living day to day, right?
Yeah.
And they have, and it's not just a teacher, and it's not just a multidisciplinary team. It's that combination that they bounce ideas off each other, they try things out, right? They actually live it through the students. And then what I love about it is the fact that they'll come to you, this is 6 months later, not even 6 months later, and say, I think we need to do this because this will cover more students.
Yeah.
And they sit down and they have a plan, they rationalize it out. I love it. It's not just an idea, but it's actually, here's what we think, and this is why. Right. And you're like, yeah, that makes total sense. Right.
So, and that only occurs when there is that collaborative culture that has been established across the school, and that it's an accepting place where we challenge ideas and we put new ideas out there to be able to experiment with and explore, knowing that it's for the good.
See, and I think this is one of the understandings, but it's also a bit of a hazard that comes with this is, let's take just that targeted learning classroom structure format. We could almost use that iceberg analogy of somebody sees that and goes, I could do that in my school. And we try and bring it and implement it just the way Joan Carr did it in their school, but we don't see the success. And the reason is because everything underneath the surface of the structures and processes, the collaborative team meetings that have led to a shift in how we share practice and that culture that has been built. I mean, that's one of the hazards is someone could see that program, go back, try it in their school, and then go, this doesn't work. What's Joan Carr thinking?
That's right. And that's a super important point, because we literally have probably once a month a school visiting us, right? And sometimes multiple schools. And what we and I always have that sort of pre-meeting with that group, whether it's a principal or their learning team, and say, look, this has been, this will look different for you, and they recognize that they may not have the certain personnel that we have, or there's certain room that we have. But what we do find is once you have that sort of background talk, and even the best talk is having that talk with the teacher. That initial, they take about half an hour, and then when you see it in action, inevitably what I hear is, okay, now we know that, it doesn't have to be the Joan Carr method, right? Yeah. Some preamble, but you've spoken to the teacher. And if you're thinking as a principal in the lens of what you have, what I've heard from every person that has walked out of this building is, I can do that piece of it.
Yeah.
Right? I can't do all of it, but I can do that piece of it.
Yeah.
Now that's critical, right? Because that's you have a team that recognizes that, this is, if you want to do it at face value, you're going to say it's not going to work. right? You can't walk in and say, well, I don't have this and I don't have that. You have to walk in with that mindset of what can actually fit in our school environment, because we're doing a variety of things.
Yeah.
And so inevitably what we see and hear is that, I think we can do this, and this is how we're going to try it.
So
starting place.
Yeah. One of the things that's really critical in that, and I'm going to go back to what you said of, we have 5% of our student population identified as ASCD, and in a different school culture, there could be there's not much that we can do with that. We need more resources, more people, more whatever. And again, I'm not negating the need for resources, but to be able to say, we have this culture of collaborative response and collective efficacy that says, this is our reality. So what could we do? And let's, like you said, let's not just talk and generate an idea. Let's action it.
Yeah.
And then take the first step, which will lead to another step, which will lead to another step.
Yeah. There's that whole idea of that intention and implementation, right? You can have all the intentions in the world, but you just got to go for it at some point.
Yeah.
And like I said, what it started with and where we are now are completely different. And that was okay. I mean, that was a discovery process, and it was a process of trial and error. But what we know is that, we knew things were working, and we just had to continually refine things and try different things out. But you could get into that fixed mindset of there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, the reality is you can. Is it easy? No. Is it hard work? Yes. Are there frustrations along the way? Absolutely. Right. But if you have to have that, fundamentally, you have to have that structure within your building that says, I, as a teacher or I as a staff member, can make a difference. And when you have that, then there's that learning zone of, we can do this.
Yeah. And the journey that you're talking about in terms of, things look a lot different now than they did when we first started, is really that evidence of learning. That we've been learning along the way and making the changes that we need, because we know we can do things for students and we can make a difference for students. So Darrin, we'd like to pose this sentence stem for you, and just to give us a sense of what you have seen happen over these years within collaborative response. So as a result of collaborative response, we have seen...
We'll be right back to continue this episode.
Feeling overwhelmed with the expectations being placed on teachers, leaders, and educational systems to respond to the diverse needs of our learners?
Are you wanting to take your PLCs and RTI efforts to the next level?
It definitely takes a highly coordinated framework of structures and processes to maximize the collective capacity of your team to ensure success for all students. Collaborative response is that framework.
Order your copy of our bestseller, Collaborative Response, 3 foundational components that transform how we respond to the needs of learners, which includes access to a comprehensive companion website. Join the thousands of schools using the framework to ensure high levels of success for students and staff. And now back to our conversation.
As a result of collaborative response, I've seen a lot. We truly have seen a sense that our teachers have the ability and the confidence to deal with what's in front of them. And what I mean by that is I sometimes feel that with all good intentions, we can provide supports and people, and what gets lost is the classroom teacher's ability to say, hey, I got this, right? Yeah. And so, and not that we're saying that, hey, you don't need a one-to-one, or we're saying you don't need that support of an MDT member, that is fluent and prevalent here.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that we don't want our teachers to feel like that this is hopeless and that I can't do this, right? And so I feel that the collaborative team meetings and the collaborative response approach has instilled, number one, a sense of that confidence coming back as a teacher, that confidence that, okay, there are some things in place and I have supports and I have colleagues that are working with me and I don't get this piece of it, but somebody else does and I'm going to try that, right? So there's that confidence piece, and that I think that leads to, with the confidence comes that ability to say, okay, I actually am making a difference in this student's life, right? I'm actually making a difference within my classroom. And what you start to see is within those great partners is the stories where they start to celebrate, right? And they celebrate in the collaborative team meetings, but they celebrate in the hallways and they celebrate in the staff room and they celebrate, like at an assembly. Like, it's just seeing those teachers feel like, okay, this is hard work. And yeah, this is a challenge, but you know what? I've got this. And what I don't have, I've got some support and I've got my colleagues to help me out along the way.
Love it.
Love
That's
it.
great. So we've asked you this one before in a previous conversation, but I'd love to ask it again. We include it in every one of our podcasts, and it goes like this. In the spirit of, if you knew then what you know now, what advice would you give your past self in relation to the collaborative response work?
Stick to the structures. We sure learned that the hard way. I mean, I think I haven't talked to you about that. In my first year was not having the structure of the meeting in place led to that Johnny coming up every single time in a meeting, right?
Yeah.
And like, how do I get around this? And you were instrumental, Kurtis, in turning that shift in what was astonishingly a short amount of time. But part of that piece was, having those structures in place, those roles in place. And since then, now that I look back at it, could have made my life a whole lot easier. But you grow and you learn.
You do.
Even now, it's not perfect. I find myself saying, didn't stick to the top. You know what I mean? You have to understand, you have to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
Right? No, you've done this so many times that you've got it down to a science. So
and I still forget all the little nuances too.
Course, right? And so you have to be good with yourself and understanding that there's going to be some slip ups, but for sure, having those structures in place, having it, even the simple thing of having it up on a smartboard for all to see, really zones in the attention of what's happening and what my responsibility is, right? In terms of seeing it, understanding it, people contributing, and it's right there on the screen. That piece of it makes a big difference. So for me, understanding that the structures are not nice to have, they're actually an essential piece of making that meeting flow.
Yeah. It's interesting because we had a recent guest on that we had chatted with, and he had said, for the staff teams that say, we don't need structures, we're already really collaborative. He has been saying, put the structure in because it will be like putting gasoline on an already burning fire. You think you're collaborating well now, look what it would look like if you had clearer structures and processes to it. Yeah. So Darrin, as noted, we're going to share the playbook in the show notes, as well as your email address if people have questions to be able to reach out. But always appreciate having a chance to connect, and very much enjoy being able to learn from you and the experiences that you're leading at, not just Joan Carr, at previous schools as well. But I always walk away with, that's a great next step.
Such a pleasure to chat with you this afternoon, Darrin, again, and being able to hear your journey, but share that with others as well.
And if people are viewing or listening to this prior to May 2025, Darrin's going to be at our collaborative response retreat in Lacombe. So come and you'll be able to pick his brain right at that space. And I know that you're also presenting at a few different conferences upcoming too. Hey, Darrin?
Yeah, I'm presenting at ULEAD.
Yeah.
Great.
In April, and then there's actually January 22nd is a quick little journey with Lead Meet, which is from the Council of School Leadership.
Nice.
I'm trying to figure out how to get this journey done in 15 minutes. Like, I'm gonna do that, but I'll work it out. But
Talk really fast.
yeah, that's what it's gonna have to be. And fast
Speed it
slides,
up.
but it's hard to put that in 15 minutes. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Darrin. We really appreciate this and look forward to our next conversation.
Absolutely, and appreciate the opportunity, and thank you once again for allowing me to share and hopefully help some schools along the way.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Darrin. Take care.
Take care.
Obviously, it's not our first conversation with Darrin, and it's not even our first podcast episode, but it's interesting because each time we talk, there's that next evolution.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the key takeaways for me in this is the understanding that your collaborative response work is constantly being, to use his words, tweaked and refined.
Yeah.
It's constantly evolving and growing. And when he thinks about something as just one small little component, that targeted learning classroom, even that looks nothing like what it did when they first started. But I guess it goes back to the get started.
Yeah.
Magic, and then realize that it's going to evolve, grow, and change as you're really putting the structures in place.
Well, and one of the things he talked a lot about was co-creating everything they're doing with their team. And if you are truly co-creating, then you're not going to always follow a step-by-step process that it might take you different directions. And that's why we're constantly revising and evolving as we go, because we're being influenced by the people who are in our building, teaching our students in that particular community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a few little small nuggets that we can take away for this of one, and we learned this as well, of having admin involved in the meetings, critically important. And him saying, we started off by using admin to free up teachers, which was a good starting place, but our involvement has just led to increasing our understanding and learning as well from a leadership perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And just that whole idea that he talked about it explicitly at the end there about use the structures.
Yeah, I was I always like hearing some things like that reinforced, because for someone first starting in this work, when you say trust the process, use the structures, sometimes that's kind of hard advice. You're telling me to do these meetings with norms and rules, and we've had meetings forever where we haven't had that and they work great.
Well, and he even talked about it as it's a little bit weird at first, but knowing that actually is going to help you, and it will become more fluent as you go along, but it's definitely going to be a piece that will help you in the end.
Did you also take away, and I think this is one of our critical ahas when schools get into a place of this is just part of who we are as a school culture, but they're at a place now where, yes, they're responding to student needs, of course.
Yeah.
But their primary focus is about continual building of capacity. Yeah. So he talks about how the EA skill set, our educational assistant skill set, is constantly being grown and refined. Teachers are helping to build one another's capacity. But we often say the collaborative response work is, of course, meant to have positive outcomes for students. Of course. Yeah. But it's doing it in a way that is all about capacity building across the entire organization, from individuals to teams to the collective whole. And it really came through clearly that that's the primary intention through all of this work is clarity and building capacity, which leads to the positive outcomes for kids.
Which really is the essence of their playbooks.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the idea that those playbooks are, like you said, co-created, co-constructed, critical.
Yeah.
So
amazing.
As always, reach out if you have questions, like, subscribe, and share the podcast with others. And again, a thank you to Darrin and bringing forth the work happening at Joan Carr, where it is 100% evident that every child is benefiting from their focus on teams. So with that, wishing you all the best. Check out the show notes. There is a number of resources there for you. Take care.
See you soon.
For more on collaborative response, visit jigsawlearning.ca or join the JL Insider to receive access to newly added resources and content. Make sure to follow us on social media. Subscribe to the podcast and the Jigsaw Learning YouTube channel to access past and upcoming episodes. Join us again to continue to build your own capacity in leading collaborative response in your context.